Dr. Ernie Goss is an institution in rural economics. He's been a professor at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska since 1992. Radio, newspapers, TV, podcast, his thoughts get shared far and wide. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Dr. Goss also helps to lead the Rural Main Street Index. He surveys bank leaders and CEOs in 200 smaller communities, and he gets a feel for what is really happening in the rural Midwest. It's 10 states he surveys. Now, these days, what's happening is not exactly awful, but it is challenging. Why don't you start us off when people stop you and say, hey, how's the ag economy doing these days? How do you answer that question?
Fair to middling. No, actually, I say it's, well, depends on what part of the ag economy you're looking at. Grain farmers, not so well. Of course, many farmers do both grain and livestock, but livestock side's definitely doing better than the grain side. Grain farmers, at least according to the bank CEOs who we survey in rural areas of 10 states, is saying, nope, things aren't going very well. In fact, prices right now are probably below break even for most farmers of wheat, soybean, and corn, for example.
I've talked to you at various times over the years about things. I've never asked you what made you put that together to begin with. What made you put that index together?
Well, I wish I could say it would just came from me, but it didn't. It came from a banker, a bank CEO, Bill McQuillan, in Nebraska, a rural area of Nebraska, and he had the idea, and he came to us being Creighton University faculty in finance and economics. I'm in that department, and he proposed it, and I thought, well, it makes sense. So he and I came up with the questions and the survey methodology and so on. So that's how it started in, wow, 2006. Seems like it was just the other day, though.
It's been a couple of the other days as things have gone on. So what do
It has
you,
been.
when that thing comes out each time, what always piques your curiosity?
Mostly this farmland prices. That's
Mhm.
always a good, I think, a pretty good indicator of what's the long-term outlook for farming and agriculture. And of course, that has remained very solid until recently. Now it's moved lower, but not to the degree farm income has moved lower. Farmland prices have held up reasonably well, given what's going on in agriculture across the midsection of the country. Of course, that's stretching. That's from north in North Dakota over west to Colorado and Wyoming. South we got Kansas, Missouri, and east we got Illinois, and of course closer in Iowa.
And is it counterintuitive when you're looking at that factors, or have things changed so that it's not?
I'm not counterintuitive. That what part is counterintuitive?
Counterintuitive in that land prices, fortunately, have
Uh,
not fallen the way farm incomes have.
well, no, it is. It makes a lot of sense to me because the farmers I meet and talk to, and the bankers I meet and talk to, and live in this part of the country, they take a long term perspective. In fact, to their children and to their grandchildren, that both those two to their offspring and heirs, and they look at that, and so they're holding up farmland prices. Again, that's more of a long term uh, a factor, a metric that we look at, and I think it holds up again better than farm income. Farm income is down, I won't say dramatically. Again, we're talking about grain, livestock, beef and pork, holding up reasonably well according to the bankers survey. And of course, it comes out to be our next one comes out on Thursday, November the 21st.
I deal with, I've covered politicians for a long time, and it's funny the way you describe the difference, at least to me, because farmers have that long-term outlook, if we could get politicians to look at long term instead of the next election, I suspect our conversation might be a little different.
Well, Dave, as I sometimes, and I think I never heard this before, but I'll say I quote. You can quote me on it. Bad politics always defeats good economics, and that means they take a short run. Politicians take a short run approach. What in many cases gets them elected. Not all politicians are that way, but
Of
a
course.
lot of politicians want to get elected, and unfortunately, a lot of voters out there also take that approach, and they vote, and sometimes those votes are not what's best for the economy.
For sure. All right. So, what are you following? What's your index showing trend wise? Because some of it was kind of going in the wrong direction, right?
Bill is going in that wrong direction, Dave.
Mhm.
Farm equipment sales, we detected that long before we saw John Deere laying off and others. The farm equipment sales have now declined for the 15th straight month. Of course, no surprise to farmers out there that with interest rates significantly higher and with farm income down, farmers are taking a much more different approach to farm equipment than they are to farm land, and they pull back on their purchases of farm equipment, and that's certainly an indicator. We always, each month we ask several special questions and relevant to what's going on now in the economy. We have 9 standard questions we ask each month, but special questions, that's always what I watch out for. And last month, for example, we asked about um, which presidential candidate was more supportive of you felt was more supportive of agriculture and the farm economy, and 85% said President Donald Trump, and not only 4% said Vice President Kamala Harris. That was sort of surprising to me, given that President President-elect Trump, now President-elect Trump, has said, "Hey, we're going to have across-the-board tariffs." Now,
Tariffs.
you won't find many economists that agree with that. I think he's, I think he's a negotiator in chief, and that's more posturing, I hope, because we would not be doing well. Agriculture and manufacturing don't do well with a high tariff regime. Now, again, if you're talking about selective tariffs and selective nations and pushing them to reduce their tariffs to accommodate our agriculture, for example, that'd be a good move. But I hope that's what's going to be happening.
Yeah, with him, it's always a challenge to figure out what's just a threat and what's posturing and, what he really truly is going to do. But as we've kind of sampled various economists over these last couple of months, I haven't found a single one that has told me, yeah, let's do this, let's go tariff crazy. It's fascinating how uniformly economists oppose this.
Yeah, and I think the president-elect would say, well, if you could figure out what I was doing, it wouldn't be effective. In other words, it is sort of like back in the 80s, everybody said, well, that crazy old man Reagan, President Reagan,
Yeah.
and we're afraid of him. So that fear engendered and produced some positive outcomes. Now, I would say, hopefully, President-elect Trump is not going to push for across the board. That would be 99%, 99.9% of economists disagree with across the board tariffs. In other words, but we globally, Dave, we're moving in that direction, not across the board, but globally, we're in the resorting back to what was called mercantilism many years ago, many centuries ago, actually. And that's where you try to increase exports and reduce imports. That's not a good policy. I mean, what are we going to do? Produce hothouse bananas and hothouse Iowa bananas? I don't think we want to do that. We want to produce soybean here and trade it for Guatemalan bananas effectively.
Right. What do you make when you see? I was just reading earlier today, before we dialed you up here. Iowa is up to about 4,000 or so layoffs in the ag sector, roughly speaking. When you see a headline like that, what are we supposed to make of that? How do we know if this is a short-term bump or if some of this is more semi-permanent?
Oh, I think it's all ag is up and down. It's volatile. And they live it, and people say, well, they live it, and I talk about
Hmm,
it, and it is tough. But I think in the long run, Dave, we live in the best part of the best nation on the face of the earth. Our agriculture is the most productive on the face of the earth. We will come out of this. We will do well, but in that doing well, it is painful. And I have to say, I bought a Van Eck ETF, farm ETF. It's a MOO, MOO. I bought it at 93. It's now down to 69 and change
hmm.
last time I looked. In other words, the entire ag, all those they're not, of course, farmers in there. They're ag equipment producers, Bayer, others that are producing inputs to farming. So they're not doing well, but eventually they will do well. I mean, John Deere is not going to go out of business. Of
For
course, the
sure.
president-elect has threatened them. If they move to Mexico, he's going to put 100% tariff on
200, I
imports of
think, right?
what's that?
I think it's 200, isn't
Oh, is I when anything gets that high, I just sort of I
it?
I would say if nothing else, President-elect is unpredictable, and he's looser with his language than I am. I say some things I regret. I don't think he ever says anything he regrets.
I don't
He
think so.
says some things I regret.
All right. So when you're looking, maybe two things. One thing that stood out to me when you're talking about farm equipment purchases down, what'd you say, 15 months straight?
Correct.
Well, how long, I mean, how long can that continue? At some point, I didn't grow up on a farm, but I'm always, when I'm out meeting folks and I've done stories with them over the years, it's their farmers' minds to me are amazing about how you're like, oh, I can fix that. I can fix that. I can do this. I can do that. And I just don't have that kind. I wish I had that kind of brain. I can't even fix a leaky toilet. But
Uh,
I mean, you can only, that ingenuity, that can only last so long, right? At some point, if it's going to go out, it's going to go out. Like, how long can you put off those major purchases?
well, we will see those major purchases be made, and when the interest rates come down. Now they are coming down on the short end.
Hmm.
I expect, unfortunately, those to go back up in the second half of 2025. Now, why is that? Because the Federal Reserve, we're going to there's too much. There's going to be too much inflationary pressures. Besides, the federal government cannot continue to pay interest payments now over $1 trillion on the debt, and so what there is an incentive. The Fed's moving to lower interest rates because of that. That's one of the reasons. And also, they're mistaken about inflation coming down. I think it will go back up. I don't think there'll be a rate cut in December. So that,
You
in
don't
other
think
words,
there will be at all, not even a quarter?
I don't think so. I think there's too much uncertainty out there, Dave. I really do think it is, and I think they made a mistake by going 50 basis points in December. It should have been a quarter and a quarter again uh, in this month. So, in my judgment, so I think they need to don't move so quickly, because it's like a campfire that you thought you put out, and all of a sudden it flares up. That could be inflation. Now it's down pretty low, much lower than I expected. But again, I'm concerned about that. But back to the point, though, I do. We will see farmers get back in. I mean, what if they could survive? They, being the farm sector, could survive the '80s. By golly, they'll certainly survive this. This is small potatoes. And by the way, Dave, they came into this, according to bank CEOs, they came into this downturn in this pretty good economic position.
Hmm.
Farm loan delinquencies are not that high. Farmers are paying back their loans now. The bank CEOs have stiffened their loan requirements, and they are being less generous in their lending. But nonetheless, it's still not as dire as I'm portraying it. I think, Now our index, overall index, has declined for 14 straight months. So I do think long term, again, what we need, and it's what we all need. It's not just agriculture, but ag is the area that's producing it the most, is productivity. And farmers continue to be more and more and more productive with more and more inputs that increase productivity. Now, if we could all be that productive, and I think we in education, we're getting more productive. I mean, I'm doing Zooms, I'm doing this. I mean, by golly, going into the classroom today, it's challenging, and it should be. I mean, everybody, why should I get off? Why should we get off easy? I mean, I have to say, I don't. It's better than putting roofs on houses. I come from a family of construction people, so
A lot
I just
easier on the knees
yeah,
and the back.
exactly. It's so I'm a lucky in that respect. It's so again, it will turn around. It's hard to see the daylight when you're just covered up in darkness. Well, again,
Sure.
I'm overstating the darkness. It's not as bad as I'm portraying it. Again, a lot to do with livestock, but also I think we're going to turn. Exports are looking a little bit better.
Hmm.
And again, if President Trump now, if he President-elect Trump is selective in his tariffs and pushes them being China, them being other nations out there, them to reduce their tariffs, or we're going to slap a tariff on your imported goods, your goods that are imported to the U.S. Then if they move off that, you could see some positives coming out of the tariff threats. Now, again, unfortunately, we're seeing globally more and more nations are moving toward, well, we've got to pull our, we've got to reduce our imports and increase our exports. Well, we can't all do that. It doesn't, the math doesn't work.
Right. This is, I'm going to try to straddle a line here because this may come out insensitive, but uh, the folks you're sampling, these bank CEOs, we have historically, maybe outside of ag, but historically we've gone through some periods where the financial lending institutions were a little too generous, right? I mean, wasn't that part of our issue going into 2007 and 8 where we got over leveraged on stuff? Is it for the health of everything, is it essentially okay where we get a little more restrictive on who's going to qualify? And I appreciate if I'm the guy asking for money, I probably think that's an inane question, but does that make sense? Like, there have to be
Well,
certain standards here, right?
oh, absolutely. And that's what happened in the 80s. It's happened in 2009 and 8 and 9 in the housing sector. We did it in housing.
Hmm.
But in the case of the agriculture, they being the farmer borrowing and the banker lending, were both um, overly optimistic, I will say, about farm income. And not and the downturn lasted longer than many anticipated, and the farmer was too over leveraged because of the weakness in exports and agricultural commodity prices. And of course, it didn't help to have embargoes on exports of wheat to Russia, as
Sure.
Jimmy Carter, President Carter, implemented.
Hmm.
Those don't help. In other words, sometimes the farmer is at the tip of the spear in terms of, okay, we in the U.S. will show them, we'll cut off their corn in, for example, Mexico. All right, you want to mess with us? We won't sell you our corn. We'll embargo it. Well, fair. That's okay for the nation, perhaps not okay, but it's certainly very painful for the farmer. And unfortunately, that's sometimes it's it doesn't get the sensitivity it should get.
Hmm.
And living in farm country, I now understand it better than I ever did when I lived on the East Coast.
They don't understand anything on the coast. You got to come to the Midwest to see how it really
That's
is.
right. That's
Hey, so
right.
you mentioned your index has 9 questions. Is there a question or two in particular that really underscores to you the challenges right now? Or is it all a blend?
No, the overall index is certainly it's separate, and it captures most of it. And I think the bank lending issue and other bank conditions, for example, we ask about farm loans, farmland loans, not farmland loans, farm loans,
Hmm.
and then we ask about checking account balances. We ask about CD purchases and so on. So those let us know a little bit about the condition of the farmer. But of course, these bankers are not just serving farmers; they're also serving the rural communities
Right.
in which the farmer does business. Well, where the farmer does the purchasing a lot of his inputs, certainly, and that's so the rural communities are not doing they're doing better than the farm right now, and that's pretty clear. In other words, when you look at job growth in rural areas, the small communities, the average size of these communities is 1,300, so small.
Sure.
And there may be some over 1,300. Well, there will be some over 1,300, but on average 1,300. So some of those communities are doing better than the farm itself. But again, back to your question about those, all those, I typically, for example, don't look at the job number because the farmer in this part, I was doing a survey of Central Valley in California. I was a research faculty member at Cal State Fresno, and there that was important. You know, whereas we're in this part of the country, farmers are capital intensive. They're using a lot more equipment, don't use as much labor. So I don't pay as much attention to that, the jobs number, because that really reflects what's going on in the restaurants and the other businesses, the clothing stores and the hardware stores in town.
So how long though can the town withstand the struggles of the farmer? I mean, isn't there a ripple there?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we've been seeing it now for some time. If you take Nebraska, for example, you're talking about 93 counties, Iowa 99, 105 in Kansas, I believe, and the rest I'm not quite sure. They're not county counts, but a lot of those counties, a high proportion, high share. In Nebraska, 75 have fewer people in them population wise than they had in the 1930s. So it is a slow drain, absolutely. But that's because of um, not the farm downturn. It's more of a long term where the farmer is getting more and more productive, and there
Hmm.
are fewer and fewer farms. You are seeing, of course, fewer and fewer farms and larger farms that have less and less employment per farm. So that does it does put it down. It drains the local areas certainly. So what we've needed, and we've had governors, of course, say, well, we need to get value added agriculture into these rural areas. So when the farmers get larger, and that they can that we have the inputs that would take up the slack, some of the inputs, whether that's a fertilizer company, yeah, but there's some resistance in some of the communities we've seen to some of those companies that moving in. For example, a fertilizer plant that wants to move into Aurora, Nebraska. There is some resistance locally to that. Well, sometimes you have to, I don't say suck it up, but if you want to keep your community in, and and not combine, not to have loss of cities or towns, I should say, you need to be pro, take a pro outlook on those, and as a result, we also need to look more positively at legal immigration. I'm saying legal, not coming across the border in Texas or
Hmm.
Arizona, but individuals that want to move here, that 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 let's be open to them, because they're not as biased as I mean, if you living in certain parts of the nation, you have this thing about, well, I don't want to move in that rural area, that midsection of country, and freeze to death, you know. Well, Vietnamese don't always look at it that way. I mean, and they're much more free thinking. We're somewhat, and we get
Close-minded
biased.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
blind is a better term. Yes.
I see the opportunities for sure. All right, you talked about you don't want to be too dark. All right, so let's be a little optimistic here. So when you're looking within the index, when things are starting to turn, where will you see it?
We'll see it in the overall index for sure. We'll see farmland prices move in. Well, it did move up last month, by the way,
Hmm.
slightly. We'll see farm equipment sales begin to look better. We'll see farm loans, probably we'll see a decline there. And we'll see uh, employment number, as I said, remain pretty good. And we'll see better trade data. Trade data has not been bad. I mean, you know, we continue to export, and I'm hoping upon hope that it's going to be very important. I mean, what President Biden does, President-elect Biden, President-elect Trump does in terms of his trade negotiators, we cannot just slap those tariffs on blindly. And I'm certain they won't. They can't, because
Hmm.
agriculture and manufacturing get hit heavily for those. So I'm counting on them to say with China. China's a chief uh, partner of ours, chief destination, for example, soybean pork. To negotiate with them, say, well, if you want to have your toys imported into the U.S. without significant tariffs, then you will reduce your tariffs on agricultural goods. Now that would be a good thing. What happens in many cases is they divert their goods through Vietnam, for example, and send them here
Hmm.
to avoid the tariff. They've done that moving through Mexico, for example. We've seen that.
Kind of
So
use them as a middleman.
absolutely, and we have seen that, and they're sensitive to that. I mean, we're and those, it does seem economists since Ricardo in 19th century of Great Britain or England have been, we understand the comparative advantage. In other words, we don't want to be growing bananas here, hothouse bananas in Iowa or Nebraska
Right.
or Montana Merlot. No, no, we want to let them do that. We want to do what we're good at. And we're good, not me, of course, but we're good at agriculture. We're good at manufacturing. We're the best, and we're productive, and we're the, you know, we're gonna the but getting afraid. It's just so, and we in academics, we get afraid. We, you know, and if I were afraid, I mean, half the, not half, but high proportion of faculty members in my department were not born in the U.S. and they make me better. They make me get up and go to work hard, and
Hmm.
and they're good partners, and they've really, and that's the way it is. We have to just understand that our system is the best. I mean, it could be better, but it's, we don't want to go the route. Everybody, I remember when everybody said, "Well, Japan's going to take over." I lived in Tennessee at one time. Going to take over Tennessee. Going to take over the U.S. Well, and I said at the time, it's not going to happen. It didn't happen.
It did not.
China
That's right.
is not going to displace the U.S. regardless. That system of autocratic government doesn't work. Politicians cannot make good economic decisions. And Xi Jinping, head of the Chinese Communist Party, is making decisions that are counter to good economic policy, maybe good for authoritarianism. I mean, he can squash his population. But when you look at consumption in America, we're at 67% consumption. They're at 40 to 45. In other words, they're producing for us. They're not producing for their own population. So their own population is going without. So that's what, without a lot of things that we have.
All right, wrap us up here and give us a kind of reality check of where we're going. Is it fair to say, based on everything you're seeing, we're going to have to grind it out for a while? Now,
We're
maybe we had a couple of years there that I mean, they were really rolling in it, and these last two, it's gone down. But as we move toward 2025, is it going to be a grind through the whole year?
I don't think it'll be a grind, but it'll perk up in 2025 over 24, but it'll still not be where we want it to be. It's going to be somewhat of a grind, and a lot will depend on what President-elect Trump and his team does in terms of tariffs. It's very important. Also depends on a lot on what happens to interest rates with the Federal Reserve and investors globally. I mean, we're seeing a lot of central banks across the globe, whether it's the People's Bank of China, the European Central Bank, or others. They're buying gold, and they're not holding dollars as much. So the dollar, as a reserve currency, it's not threatened, but it certainly doesn't have the status it did 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and that's going to be another important factor. And but so they're stockpiling gold, which means they're not buying our treasury bonds, which means long term. If you've noticed, Dave, after the Fed reduced short-term interest rates on September the 18th by 50 basis points or 0.5%, the next day long-term interest rates in the U.S. went up, and everybody's in shock.
They're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's exactly, and long-term interest rates are 0.75% higher today than they were when the Fed began reducing interest rates. And everybody's like, well, that's a mystery to me. No, it's no mystery. There's no mystery to it. They control short-term interest rates. The globe, investors globally determine long-term interest rates. Right now, long-term investors globally are betting on higher inflation. They're betting on, and they want to be paid more for loaning us money. And they're seeing us getting indebted more and more. And they're saying, wow, the U.S. is getting out there a little bit. So I want a higher payment of interest. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, it was 3.7 when the Fed began cutting rates, but long-term rates were 3.7. They're now 4.5, almost 4.5 on the 10-year treasury, for example. So that's pushed up mortgage rates. So the farmer is like everybody else out there, borrowing for land and long-term borrowing. Borrowing costs are still high and moving higher there. But to the long term, again, I want to emphasize what I see as an economist. Now, I'm not an ag economist. I'm just a regular old economist. And what I see is that our farmer is working with equipment, working with knowledge, educated, going to, whether it's Iowa State, Colorado State, Nebraska, educated, coming back to the farm and implementing very strong policies that move farm income higher and farm output higher. So long term, I couldn't be more positive. I mean, I still own that Van Eck ETF, MOO, MOO. I'm not selling. It's down. Yeah. It's dropped $21 a share since I bought it. I'm holding on. I thought if I were negative on the farm economy, I'd be selling. I'm not negative.
Well, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Always good to talk to you, Dave. And hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and you and your family and friends and everybody out there. I'll be on Iowa Market to Market next week. We usually do a TV program before Thanksgiving. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. I don't know.
Oh, let's hope it's a good sign. Well, we appreciate you. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Dave. Good to be with you.
Learn more about Dr. Ernie Goss in our profile piece. We feature him in our weekly American Farmland Owner newsletter. You can find that along with the most recent Rural Main Street Index. Just go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com And if you enter your email address, you can get that weekly newsletter sent right to your inbox for free every week. It's the place where landowners get their news. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.